Welcome back to Get the Check. I'm Maya.
I'm Monica.
I'm Vidushi.
I'm Priya.
And today's episode is on Scale AI. Scale AI is known as the data labeler for many machine learning models. They were founded in 2016 by Alexander Wang and Lucy Guo, and they've expanded beyond data labeling into more of an ML platform in general. But they are a pivotal player in the AI landscape, and they serve many major clients, including OpenAI, Meta, and the DoD. To start off, before we get into Scale, I think it's important to establish like a baseline of the players in the AI space and how Alexander Wang kind of thinks of this space in three pillars.
Yeah, so there's three pillars that are commonly referred to when we're talking about AI. They're compute, algorithms, and data. So to start with the first pillar of compute, this is basically the hardware and cloud infrastructure that's necessary for managing and processing this data. So the key players in the space are NVIDIA, which produces the GPUs. There's also AMD, Google, and on the cloud infra space, there's AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud.
The second pillar is algorithms and models. So we have foundational models from OpenAI and Meta, like LLAMA. And then we have fine-tuned models that are those models tuned for a specific task or domain.
The third pillar is data, and this is where Scale AI sits. And basically, you need high-quality data for training the AI models under the algorithm pillar, for example, ChatGPT. So this data labeling helps train their outcomes over time. Some people might wonder why there needs to be a whole pillar for data refinement when it's just like seemingly simple tasks like data labeling. But once AI came about, this became too big of a problem for companies like Meta to do in-house.
Yeah, and so then Scale built out an entire data engine where they take in all this data and then hire a bunch of contractors. I think they have like close to 240K contractors, which is insane. And these people just sit there and label the data all day long.
That was my job for 3 months.
Where?
Yeah, I did an internship and they had me watch hundreds of hours of footage of a little mouse like sitting in a box scratching itself, and I had to go in and tag every time it started and every time it stopped. And they're like,
Vidushi, the rat queen.
No. Oh my god, no.
At least you were getting paid a decent wage to do this.
That's true.
Yeah, some of these data labelers are not getting paid a decent wage. So basically, Scale created a few subsidiaries like remote tasks in order to find these data labelers. And it's very manual and menial labor. Sometimes they're only paying these people $2 an hour. And there's even like a whole black market of buying accounts that are like high-level accounts that have been marked as like an expert user.
Because
those
they get
people
paid
more
more.
tasks. Yeah.
I was reading about this and I thought, okay, why can't I start a company that just hires a bunch of people to like put text onto data
And then become a billionaire.
Exactly. And then I read more and more, and it's this whole framework that they have to build, because when they first started, they were competing against Mechanical Turk, and Mechanical Turk was just like an open marketplace of like, hey, I need this data to be labeled, go and label it. But they were able to come in and like have a whole end-to-end solution. They have to acquire these people and then, farm out the data to each individual person to go and finish the task, bring it back, make sure it's
high quality.
Yeah.
The quality control that they were able to bring to the space, I think, is super key here, because with something like Mechanical Turk, because you're just hiring anyone out there, there's no quality guarantee on any of this data. And the way the data is being used today compared to what it was being used for back then is like so significantly different that the quality of data really matters now.
Yeah. And this gets into the whole conversation of like, does Scale AI have like a technical moat or like some edge, and can people really replicate the data labeling service that they've made?
Yeah, I think that part of their technical moat comes from operational expertise in a way that like Uber's technical moat comes, where everyone talks about like how they're able to expand operations in a lot of different cities, because even similarly, like they've found a way to try to pay workers in like Argentina during an inflation crisis when they weren't even able to use PayPal. And so I think that with marketplaces, sometimes it feels like, couldn't anyone create this marketplace, because so much of the product is like on the backs of like contractors.
Yeah.
But I think that there's a lot of operational issues they've figured out, which isn't what I initially have in mind with Scale, which is like at the forefront of technology, that so much of it is just managing manual tasks and the workers that are doing them.
Yeah. I guess something that's been categorized as a risk to their future is synthetic data. And will synthetic data really replace their operation at scale?
Yeah, so synthetic data is basically data that's created by AI, and a lot of times it's used in edge cases. So let's say there's an edge case in, I don't drive. What's an edge case in driving?
This is so funny.
An edge case in driving would be a homeless person coming up to your car and trying to open the front door.
Oh, that happened to me.
And yeah, and so that's been happening with Waymo. Like, I think if it was a human driver, you have a sense to drive away, but the Waymo doesn't have the sense.
Right.
And part of it is probably because that's an edge case that isn't in the data that the Waymo has ingested. But synthetic data could take like a few scenarios and multiply that.
Yeah, and another thing about synthetic data is that it comes out labeled. So you don't have to go in and like process this data again and make sure it's good quality.
What's the origin of synthetic data? Is it still like real data as the starting point, or what's the starting point?
From what I understand is they take foundational models to then create synthetic data. So to create the foundational model layer in the first place, you had to have real data. But now, because there's enough of those, you can now pull out synthetic data in certain scenarios. So like foundational models are trained on like literally everything.
Yeah.
But if you want to be an expert in one field, they've found that fine-tuning a model from the synthetic data that comes from the foundational model is good enough to create a smaller fine-tuned model that's better at that space. But I think there's a whole other side of the conversation of like, what is synthetic data bad at? Synthetic data is bad at stuff that is not covered by real data, specifically like expert fields, like things that PhD people know about their own specific field that's not out there on the public internet.
That's like knowledge you can't synthetically create, right?
Yeah.
Like that's like the whole value of humans is that we have all of this knowledge and years of understanding, and you can't really create that synthetically, or at least not yet.
I think it's the fact that the foundational models are not trained on enough knowledge from those specific areas. So when an area is not covered well by a foundational model, you won't have a lot of synthetic data that gets pulled out of that.
Yeah, also when you said foundational models are trained on literally everything, right now that scope of everything is public data, but we're still missing a lot of the domain expertise you were just talking about. Maybe at some point we'll see this gap narrowing as foundational models improve, but today synthetic data is most effective when it augments real data, not when it's used alone. So the future is unclear whether synthetic data can completely replace the need for real data, since we're seeing it replace instructional data pretty well, but not preference data.
I guess to back up, we should really talk about the three types of data. So there's instructional data, which is like input and output data paired together. So I have this prompt and this is this answer. And then there's preference data of like, I like this answer over that answer. And then there's evaluation data, which is just like, this is what I've evaluated about the answer. And so synthetic data is really good at that first category.
That just strict input and output.
Input and output pairs, because that's what you get from foundational models if you think about it, right? Synthetic data is not great at the preference category. And what they've found is that the preference category is really good for post-training and performs like outsized gains compared to just input and output pairs.
Yeah, applying preferences to these types of models is called RLHF, which is reinforced learning with human feedback, which is kind of a popular technique that's been used in models.
Yeah, and RLHF has been touted as the leading contributor to model improvements since like the launches of Claude 3 and GPT-4. And there's like no indication that this is slowing down. We've seen that like post-training teams are spending heavily on synthetic data.
Actually, the inventors of RLHF were at OpenAI. And Alex was basically talking to OpenAI in 2019 and specifically talking about that technique. And that's when he realized that human feedback is super important in that process.
So there's some pretty cool research showing that improving a model's performance score is actually more cost effective when you're using post-training data rather than pre-training data. And this is because pre-training data requires significantly larger amounts of data and then therefore more compute. And in contrast, using RLHF and applying human preference data allows for similar or better improvements with just less data and less compute. So it's just more cost effective overall to use post-training.
Yeah, that makes sense. So basically post-training wins on compute and performance, but the downside is that you still need some of that human preference data.
Yeah, and basically until this RLHF data is remotely similar on the same price as pre-training compute, we will still see companies invest in that. And I think this is where Scale makes a lot of their money, is they do all three types of this data, but making sure that there's still reason to have humans in the loop in certain parts and understanding why that data helps the model is something that they like excel at.
I was reading this article and I heard that you have to book out Scale's time like months in advance to actually be able to use their data labeling.
Yeah, they're like on this really tight schedule, and even to get into that schedule, you have to have like a connection, I think. I don't think anyone can just randomly sign up.
Oh, like I have to know someone.
I think so. I'm not exactly sure. It's like similar to how NVIDIA's like GPUs right now are like super booked out and there's too much of a demand for it.
Yeah.
But I was reading that there's one team was training their model and serving it up on an endpoint, and each week they were like, this was like during the 6 weeks that they booked for like the data labeling service. And so after every week they have to like go back, refix their model to then serve it up for the next week of human data collection. Because like, again, the whole feedback thing is they need humans to give feedback on each endpoint.
Right.
And so because they were on such a tight schedule, by the 5th or 6th week, they didn't have enough time to like take in the human feedback to retrain it properly to then serve it up again.
Yeah.
And so they essentially just paid Scale for like 2 weeks of data that they didn't even use. Yeah.
It's really
That's
unfortunate for them.
Yeah. And I'm sure like a lot of other people are doing this.
Because model training takes so much time and so much compute. Like, I'm sure you've experienced this where like you just wait for a model to like tune or train and you just sit there and it takes forever.
Yeah.
And if you're on a schedule, that's like double.
Well, because you could be
pressure.
sitting there for like hours waiting for the model to fine tune.
Yeah.
And like see the results of it, and then you realize like it fails.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so if you don't get it right, and then you're on this time and you're on the strict schedule, you're just like not going to be ready for the next set of data to come in. I feel like they might be taking advantage of people in this way.
Well, I just think
they're
they're running a business. Like they're just trying to make money.
Okay,
They're taking advantage of a lot of people. Don't forget the data labelers in Kenya getting paid $2 an hour.
Yeah. Before we move on though to more of their products, I do want to back up a little bit and figure out like where do they start? Like what is their founding story?
Yeah, so we've said snippets of their founding story. Like Vidushi mentioned, they started working with OpenAI in 2019. But basically, when Alex was at MIT, he was trying to build his own model and realized that he didn't have enough data to train this model of a camera in his fridge, figuring out when he was out of milk or something. So
Wait. Why did you want to train a camera in a fridge to figure you're out of milk?
I think he thought his roommate was stealing his stuff.
Oh.
Yeah, thank God he never could figure it out. Otherwise, Priya would set that up in our fridge and I'd be screwed. I've been using her peppermint creamer.
Wait. I feel like a normal person.
It's been on my conscience for a while now.
I feel like a normal person though, like if you're Alex, would just like go to the roommate and be like, hey, yo, are you like drinking my milk? Or they would just...
He's the world's youngest billionaire, so he's probably not a normal
Okay, you
person.
went to Carnegie Mellon. Like you know the type.
She is the type. Why are you saying you know the type? She is the type.
But like, so he's a type to then just be like, okay, I'm just gonna build a whole ass model to like convince...
Obviously, this is like the kitschy story they tell. Like, he had an interest in AI, and he was trying to figure out like where in the chain of the ecosystem he could play. And I think this was like a really creative place to play because it was overlooked. Because it's not like as sexy as like the algorithm space. But it ended up being like a $14 billion business. So he drops out. He does the classic YC thing with Lucy Go. At some point, they have a falling out, but that's neither here nor there.
I think at YC, so they started first as an API for human tasks. So they would just do like content moderation for like videos.
Yeah.
But then they realized there's so much data there.
The content moderation thing is like huge. Like, I have a friend from high school, like actually my weed dealer in high school. He is like a content moderator at Google, and it's actually like a really traumatizing job.
Yeah, I've heard that.
No, I'm sure
yeah,
it's super
it's-
cool.
Okay, so for
Wait,
example, you could have to look at 50 videos of terrorist beheadings and identify if any of them like are actually normal content. And it's not that dissimilar in data labeling. Like, I read stories about Scale AI data labelers having to look at similar videos to basically train a model to do content moderation. I think an inflection point is when they basically realized that the hot AI thing is autonomous vehicles, but
Yeah, because at that time, that was like the biggest application of AI.
Cutting
Yeah.
edge technology.
Yeah.
but there isn't like huge amounts of labeled data of driving because
Yeah.
before autonomous vehicles, you're not recording
You're
yourself
not collecting
driving.
any
Yeah.
data. Yeah.
It's not like writing. Like, I think writing's a good example. We have so much writing on the internet. You can look at Reddit, you can look at Instagram, you can look at Google.
Yeah, there's public data on that.
But where do you look at for driving?
Yeah.
No, yeah, for all these autonomous vehicles, we're spending their most amount of money on data, and they just didn't have enough reviewers or enough data like collected. And so I'm sure Scale at that point, we're like, okay, we can help you out with that.
Yeah, so they get this initial client base of all these autonomous vehicles like Cruise, General Motors, Lyft, Toyota. And I think this is a really good example of a company benefiting from finding a niche. Like, whenever you're starting a company, people are always like, you need a niche, you need a niche. And I think this is a great example of how a niche enabled a company to become like broad over time.
Yeah, so they get the start, and then they move on to the partnership with the DoD, because Alex believes that data is similar to oil, where it can be an economic power for the US. And so he has this like personal passion to partner with the DoD and provide AI applications for them as well. And part of that is like processing their data.
Yeah, his analogy of data and oil is really interesting, because he says that in a way it's like oil, but in another way it's not like oil, because all oil is relatively created equal, but all data isn't. And so I think his view on the world order is pretty correct, which is that like we've had a time of relative stability because there was like arms races during the Cold War, and then all relevant countries like us, Russia, China reached like mutually assured destruction with nuclear weapons. But the next war is probably going to be a digitally fought war, whether that's like cyber warfare or whatever that might mean. And in a way that's good, because hopefully that reduces human casualties, but that also means that we could be unprepared. Like, we always think of ourselves as having a military that's multiple times over stronger.
Because we spend so much
on our military. But now it's a whole new frontier.
Well, he made this really interesting comment once in a podcast, because he said with like nuclear warfare, like you can see people making advances because you literally see an entire field get destructed. But with like AI, you can't necessarily see, right? Like you could hide the fact that this AI is very good. Right, the way that like OpenAI hid ChatGPT from us for so long, because they were trying to make sure that it was like a good product to put out there, and then people were like shocked when it hit the market. So,
it's like an Apple keynote speech, but instead it's like Xi Jinping unveiling China's AI.
Yeah, and like there's been a ton of stories recently of people coming from like China, North Korea, all of these different places, and trying to infiltrate companies in the United States that are focused on things like data labeling or like partnerships with OpenAI, because they want access to this information. And so like, who knows? I wouldn't be surprised that all of these people have infiltrated a company like Microsoft, for example, who has like a partnership with OpenAI.
Wait, I didn't even realize this was a thing until you were explaining. But these guys, like you were saying, like interview, make it all the way to the final rounds, like could be hired.
Yeah.
Like, and what are they trying to do specifically?
I mean, I think there's a few different things that they're trying to do. Like, one is just like earn US dollars, and like that's one part of it. But I think the more relevant part to this is that they want to actually get the data and understand how we're training our models, probably in preparation.
Like trade secrets.
Say they're in there for like 2 weeks before someone catches them. That's more than enough time to get the data that you want.
Pav, you're trying to commit North Korean espionage, but then you're just stuck watching beheading videos for 9 hours.
Okay, so beyond the data labeling service and their founding story, they have a bunch of new products that I've been seeing. And I think this is trying to get at a bigger strategy. But before we go into that, the most recent thing that I was really interested in is Scale Donovan.
Yeah, Scale Donovan is their data AI suite for federal government contracts. So they just signed a $250 million contract with the DoD in 2022. And then they also have a very recent product announcement called Defense LLAMA.
Yeah, so Defense LLAMA is a partnership with Meta, and it's intended to serve the U.S. military. And it's really funny, actually, because when Meta open sourced Llama, there were a lot of people concerned about this being used for nefarious means. And Meta basically just said it can't be used for the military. And then it came out that a military wing of China was able to fine-tune Llama and use it for military purposes. And then after that, Meta came out and was like, actually, like, we've made some exceptions to not working with the military, and like we're working with the US military, because I think Zuck wasn't happy with people saying that he was secretly letting the Chinese get ahead. And so now there's all these companies that are allowed to work with Llama. One of them is Scale. There's other ones like Palantir, shout out, we're covering next week. Microsoft, like Snowflake, Deloitte, the ones you think. But basically in their partnership with Scale, they have created this model, Defense Llama, that's trained on like military doctrine and DoD guidelines in order to create an LLM that basically responds to military requests. So if you were to ask Llama's open source model, like, I'm in a war situation, I have these 3 options, what should I do? It would probably respond like, I cannot give you advice on how to handle a war.
Yeah.
But in Defense Llama, it responds not only with advice, but in like a formal military tone. So basically, it'll be interesting to see like how wide scale the adoption becomes. And like, are soldiers going to be like on the field in North Korea, like, hello, Defense Llama?
It's honestly giving Marvel. Like, even when you look at the product demos, I feel like, I don't know, it's just like geeking out, but it's like similar to like all the movies where, you know, you ask some like random AI assistant and they give you all these answers and it's like all black and white and really cool colors. Like, Defense Llama looks like that. It's crazy.
And the data they'll collect from this will be
Hope that never leaks. To Annika's point earlier of the list of companies that are allowed to work with Meta on creating some sort of government-based LLM, we have Palantir. And today, I don't really see Palantir as a competitor of Scale, but this is interesting because I think they might start to converge into that space.
I think Palantir has been doing this where they take the data, they understand it, and then create infrastructure around it for people to go and ask questions about this data and basically like
Create inferences.
Yeah, like data analysts like ask questions and make key decisions. And that's essentially what Scale Donovan is trying to let the government agencies do as well. Since this has been Palantir's model for the longest time, but they just haven't introduced AI into the mix, it's questionable like who will be better. So we don't know what player is going to succeed in specifically the defense market or the military market in terms of AI, but it's just interesting.
I also think that if this is the new frontier of the military, there's room for multiple players. Like Lockheed and Boeing were able to play in the traditional building of military equipment. And so I think that there's room for Palantir and Scale, even if they start to overlap a little. And more competitors is actually good for like the health of the US.
For that market. Yeah.
It's probably like one of our biggest issues as a country, that there hasn't been enough competition in the people that build for the military historically.
Yeah.
I think we've talked a lot about where Scale sits in the data part of the entire ML infrastructure and flow, but if they want to continue in this space, a natural next step for them is to start supporting more ML infrastructure and operations. A big part of their business is that they're in private cloud, so they're able to target a lot of private cloud customers, people with private data.
Yeah, I think, like Alex says this a lot, but pretty much everyone is hitting the public data wall. And now there's a race to figure out who can fine-tune on private data the best. And something that they're trying to work on is moving towards agentic AI versus generative AI. So we classically know generative AI as like asking a question, getting an answer. Agentic AI is really like accomplishing a goal. So let's say I want to build this question. You have to break it down into sub-goals of first research about this like topic, then create a Python application on it, then go deploy that application, debug it, and so forth. Like you as a human are like moving between all these different tasks, and that's what like an agentic AI is trying to mimic.
Right. It's trying to understand a human workflow essentially.
Yeah, I feel like a good example of this is like, let's say I'm writing an essay for a class, right? Traditional AI is that I'm trying to do research about this topic. I ask a question, it gives me an answer. Maybe I want generative AI to actually write that entire paper for me. So generative AI will write the whole essay. And then agentic AI is another layer on top of that where like maybe I want my model to check if anybody else has like a very similar paper as me and kind of make modifications to it. Or even go to my professor's portal and submit that.
Go to Canvas.
Yeah, exactly.
So that process, though, that you're talking about, the human process of doing all these different steps, isn't captured in public data. It's captured in private data. Like, think about if, like, they were able to screen record your screen and see what you're doing, like, all day long. And so what he's claiming is that this lives in private data. And so if you can have those relationships with the private companies and train on that private data, you can make really cool agentic AI workflows.
And even for Gen AI, hitting the public data wall has become an issue, because if you just think about your life and how many times you Google search versus how many texts you send, how many times you open your notes app, and even things that may seem public, for example, like an Instagram post on a private account, Meta has gotten in trouble for training things on that, even though you might assume that would be like public data in a way.
Yeah.
So a lot of companies are very interested in partnering with Scale moving forward, or partnering with companies in the AI space, obviously. And in a way, it already has been, because you can sell it for like ads and stuff. But I think how valuable our personal data that companies have is going to be exponential going forward.
Yeah, and I think a part of this story is like partnering with other companies that are willing to do that entire stack. And so you can see Scale AI's products and things that they're releasing is to go and
be able to support that kind of data and that kind of flow.
Yeah, so they're not only trying to be the data engine, but they're also trying to deploy those fine-tuned models on top of that engine and be also the application layer at some point too.
You could argue that that market is too congested. There's too many players in that space. But I think a lot of people want to keep all of their data and their entire flow in one place. Right now, everyone goes from one company to the other. Like my data sits here, and then my fine tuning happens here, and then I deploy my model here. Like they don't want it in 3 different places. They want it all to be verticalized.
Yeah, just because it's faster. Like you get to a better result faster.
And they don't have to wait a week for the labelers to be available.
Yeah, and I feel like going back to the 3 pillars, the algorithm race is pretty much over. The data race is...
Wait, sorry, can you explain why you believe it's like pretty much over?
I think that the players that are playing in the algorithm space right now will be the same players playing years from now.
Like we're talking about foundational models.
Yeah, like it would be really hard to catch up to OpenAI, which is why I think instead of engaging in the race of like creating AI from scratch, what companies want to do is like create a verticalized AI solution that is like the best in their industry and makes them an AI company without actually engaging in the AI race on the foundational model level.
There's also like no money in foundational models anymore, especially with like
Meta like open source llama.
Yeah. So like the margins are like pretty low. So like the players will be in the fine-tuned space on top or in the compute space below.
Which I think is the point Alex always makes about the pillars, which is like Scale is playing in a valuable spot that has more room to grow maybe.
And I think in an interesting way that they've still found a way to be involved in the foundational model space is by creating the SEAL Leaderboard, which is essentially a set of rankings that has been developed by Scale to like assess the performance of a bunch of different models and rank them themselves.
Yeah, this is like basically getting at benchmarking, which is like just like having products that evaluate the effectiveness of models. And traditionally, this is done by like open source competitors. The biggest one being LMSYS, and they have a chatbot arena where people just like go and use chatbots and then rank their.
They battle it out.
They battle it out and like rank how they feel about it. Because the whole idea is like you're trying to measure something that resembles human intelligence, but that criteria is like very hard to define. So why not just define it as like what people feel?
Yeah, and the way that Scale is different than some of these open source competitors is that the way they're assessing the models is on private data sets, and they also have domain specialization. So by doing a combination of those 2 things while also providing regular updates, it's kind of like who can keep up with it the fastest and who can evaluate it the fastest.
Yeah.
I think there's been, though, a lot of debate about how accurate these evaluations are, because if it's private data, then we don't really know what kind of data they're evaluating on. But then when it's public data, we say it's too biased or it's not like vast enough to actually give an accurate performance of this model.
Yeah. Also, when something's like not open source like that, it's like, do I think OpenAI is going to Scale and being like, oh hey, like bump up my score?
Yeah.
You know, like like they're definitely
I'm sure
something like that is
yeah.
happening. It's possible.
It's possible. I do think though that as a community, there's a lot of trust in Scale AI. And I also think it's like in their best interest to be as unbiased as possible, because this could be a huge strategic play for them in terms of like defining the future of what responsible AI is, what ethical AI is, like what all of those things mean. And so if they tainted that by
that's true.
taking something like this, I think that like is actually reputation.
But it's like everyone's word against theirs, right? I think it's more of like, okay, this is the evaluation arm of our product and we're showing you the capabilities of it rather than...
I agree, yeah. I think that also gets into like the market positioning strategy of this product specifically. Like in the announcement of the leaderboard, they go and also announce Scale Evaluation, which is the platform to enable researchers, developers being able to like evaluate your models and benchmark these models. So with the leaderboard, it's like, oh, we're clearly like the best leaderboard, so use our product as well.
Yeah, they've made it even like the Olympics of leaderboards too.
Yeah.
And then Call Sheet adds their betting market.
Oh yeah, they have it for LLMs, right?
They do. I'm never engaging in one of their betting markets ever again, though.
I think it's definitely like a B2C play. Like they're trying to
It is.
establish like brand value with like the everyday AI hobbyist or nerd, you know?
She said hobbyist, I said nerd.
Both true.
Well, yeah,
Not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, like it's trying to make like AI accessible to anyone, right?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
So I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah.
Yeah. And then I think the last thing that we should touch on, which is their most recent announcement, is Expert Match. So Expert Match essentially connects their current clients and future clients with pre-vetted experts for AI projects. And so this allows for a few different things. It allows their current client base to be connected to people with like PhD level knowledge to the point we were talking about earlier. It's also different because now Scale isn't labeling the data themselves through their contractors. They're passing this work off to a third party. And so they're basically taking themselves out of the equation and they're just a sourcer now. So they're shifting responsibility away from overseeing timelines and the quality. And so they reduce accountability that they have in this and pass project management off.
Yeah, and so in this way, they're able to focus on their other products that they're developing because now they're not coupled with the labelers that are actually doing the annotations for them.
Yeah, and I think it's like a pretty strategic pivot towards being a facilitator and more of just a general platform provider instead of a service provider.
And it's helpful to de-risk the synthetic data.
Yeah, there's a need for PhDs to kind of provide data to train models in these specific fields. I think this all like fits into this whole story of Scale trying to be the data foundry and not just a data labeler. Like a lot of people were saying that Scale doesn't have any sort of technical moat, but you can see with their recent product announcements, they're going towards this place of having a platform that like collects, analyzes, and deploys this data for use cases beyond just like the foundational model use case.
Yeah, we saw it with the types of user flow data that they have, preference data, adding humans in the loop, and then also moving towards the entire ML workflow. So they're slowly becoming crucial to every part of the machine learning lifecycle.
Yeah, and as the market's evolving in general, I think they're doing a pretty good job of keeping up with all of these changes.
Yeah, they're continuously like on the cutting edge, and this is really only made possible by workers that work at Scale AI.
The workers.
Or the employees that work at Scale AI.
Yeah, Alex has a hiring philosophy that he talks about a lot on podcasts, and there's a million articles about it. I think recently Scale codified in their hiring policy that they only hire based off of merit, and they don't have any other considerations. And that has always been their approach, but now it's like explicitly codified. And there's some pushback. I saw like a TechCrunch article saying that like they don't agree and that his philosophy is sacrificing diversity too much. Mm-hmm. And I think it's an interesting overall trend between like how CEOs talk about hiring in 2020 versus now.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of debate around diversity and inclusion. Some companies were thinking about implementing diversity quotas, and a lot of people pushed back from that. So I think there's always been like a back and forth of how do we make diversity and inclusion implemented in these businesses, but still make everyone happy.
Well, I think the reason why that started was because like people were getting jobs based on the way they looked and the way they talked, and if like some interviewer felt they wanted to be their friend through the interview. And so then people were like, okay, we need to focus on diversity and inclusion and make all these efforts to hire a diverse set of talent. And then Alex comes in and is like, wait, why did we even care about this? Like, we should have just cared about whether or not they were smart during the interview. And
like I don't completely merit-based.
Like, and make it completely merit-based.
Yeah. I think he's just saying the quiet part out loud, which is that companies don't care about diversity, at least in hiring. Like, maybe they care about diversity and inclusion once you're already at the company. Like, you shouldn't get discriminated against because you're a female partner, but they're not going to hire a female partially because they have too many male partners.
Yeah, and I think that make sense that you hire people based on their outputs. Like, I think it's like one thing to be like, oh, I want every single person to be from Stanford. But I think if you're evaluating them based on the interview that you've put forward and you see that there's a set of people that perform better on that interview, like, why would you not want those people at your company?
Yeah, I agree. I think just the counterpoint is that, like, sometimes you need to foster and nurture talent, and having such a hardo culture.
Yeah.
Like especially early, for people early in their career.
Yeah, like, it requires, like, it probably self-selects for people who are very type A, and there is talent and merit in type B people.
But I think that's more of like a company culture question, because I think I've heard of a lot of small startups that have a very hardo culture.
Yeah.
And for some companies it works and for some companies it doesn't work. But I do think that early on you can get away with a super hardo culture.
I think one critique of it is Alex's philosophy basically looks at the individual, but you're running a company. So, like, if you have a company that's a headcount of 50 and it's all men, or it's like all a certain race, there's insights that you're gonna miss. And there's like a culture, like, for example, Citadel and like the quant firms that are hyper male.
Yeah.
There's a culture they create that's so ruthless that makes people that are really smart not want to work there, like our own friend.
I do think, though, like, in well-oiled teams, there are, like, leaders and there are followers. And I think in a team, you need people who are very intense and people who are not very intense to, like, balance it out.
Yeah.
Like, if everyone's, like, constantly arguing about what should be the right thing, you're almost, like, it's stuck.
Yeah.
You know? You need people to, like, almost step aside and just do what the leader says.
Maya likes when people step aside.
But I don't think a meritocracy means that everyone needs it to be their idea.
I agree, but I think it's the way he pitches it. Like, the way he almost describes it is like, yeah, like, if you have the best idea, you should be able to campaign around the company and convince everyone that your idea is the best, which is, like, true, right? But I think it also...
But, like, if you have, like, 100
Does he
different
say that,
people,
though?
like, going around and pitching that idea and pushing for it, then, like, you're not going to get anywhere.
Exactly, and that's my point, is, like, what point is it too much?
But I also think people are smart enough to know when to do that and when to not. Like, I don't think it's like every day there's people going around saying we should do this.
I also think that him saying that is not, like, set in stone. Like, every single person, like, he looks for somebody who's going to go and voice their ideas. I feel like internally, I'm sure he's deciding, like, yes, we need a balance in this company.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like what his persona he's trying to put out as part of, like, the scale brand.
I also think that what he says is if someone has an idea the company thinks is good, they take ownership of the idea versus the VP that might be in control of that area, which is just a more flat structure that I think does benefit startups. And that just allows things to get done faster. And over time, it becomes clear who has stepped up.
Yeah, regardless if this hiring philosophy is the correct hiring philosophy, we are seeing them succeed. They're valued at $14 billion. They're projected to reach $1.4 billion ARR this year, and they're partnered with some of the top AI competitors. So Scale is clearly on the map and doing very well, and hopefully they do get to continue to march towards their mission of being the data foundry. But now I wanted to transition to the best part of our podcast, which is Restaurant Pick of the Week. Woo! For this week, we actually went to our Restaurant Pick of the Week, which was Shuggies. It's Shuggies Trash Pie and Natural. It's such a weird name. Their whole thing is that, like, they take trash from other restaurants.
Let's not
and,
call
like,
it trash, like the scraps.
the scraps from other restaurants. It's like a super sustainable
Good
thing.
scrappy.
Yeah,
Wait,
very
they're such a
SF.
scrappy business.
Very. But we did their restaurant menu, or restaurant week menu, which is like a prefixed menu. How did you guys feel about it?
It was only $30 a person for prefix, which is
Yeah,
really
I think
good
it was a
price.
great deal. I just think that every time I've ever done Restaurant Week, like in Seattle, in SF, it's just like
never good.
always kind of mid.
Yeah.
Wait, I agree, and I don't understand why.
It's because they're pumping out like so many of the same dish, and it's like, just like, I don't know.
Well, I'm also
Maybe-
sure, like, the restaurant week is a whole marketing thing, right? It's probably, like, giving attention to maybe underrepresented restaurants. No?
Not
Alex,
DEI.
Alex would not be happy to hear about
Restaurant
this.
Week DEI consultant.
No, literally, it's like DEI for restaurants.
But some of the restaurants are really nice.
Yeah, I think what it is that I don't want a prefix menu at an a la carte restaurant. Like, if I want a prefix menu, I would just go to like a fine dining restaurant that specializes in doing something like that. Otherwise, like, I'd rather choose what I want.
Priya eats off a prefix menu like every week.
No, no,
So
I'm
she's
just
like,
saying, like, I probably wouldn't have chosen like one of the apps we gotten.
They give us so much trouble about like swapping out because we all have different dietary restrictions. They were like, oh yeah, you can swap this out, you can swap that out, and then they didn't bring any of the swapped out things.
I know, and they were a little bit rude about it too. Like,
Yeah.
they came to our table and they were like, we really are busy and don't have time to keep switching out these.
Yeah.
I honestly thought they were
Service.
not very nice.
The
But I'm like,
service
no,
was pretty
they
bad.
weren't nice.
They weren't nice. And then they put cheese on our dessert.
Well, that was because it was a trash.
it was
Because it was a trash.
Oh my god.
it's so clearly it's not our restaurant pick of the week.
Yeah, but
Honestly, our
restaurant
restaurant
shame
pick of the week is our Friendsgiving dinner that we're about to have.
We're literally gonna
And we're
be
getting late.
We're getting
we
late.
need to go. Guys, we need to go
We
cook.
need to wrap
Okay,
this
all
up.
right. Bye, guys. Thanks
Okay.
for listening to our podcast and tune in for next episode on Palantir. Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.